The doors of the courthouse towered high and somber, catching the morning sunlight in icy angles that seemed more menacing than not. Individuals hobbled inside, the soles of their shoes ringing out against the gleaming marble floors. There was a scent of something faintly bookish, of coffee, and of that unmistakable tension only a courtroom carries. For Meri Brown, the moment was a far cry from the comfortable chaos of cameras and scripted drama she had become accustomed to on reality TV. Today, there were no lights, no scripted dialogue, no cameras recording her sobs for a global audience. Today, it was real, raw, indelible. Her fingers quivered lightly as she gripped the handle of her purse, the soft leather creased with years of handling, its roughness anchoring her. She had practiced this moment so many times in her head, walking through each potential outcome with careful attention, but nothing could have prepared her for the force of adrenaline she felt in really entering the courtroom. It wasn't confrontation, it was survival, claiming at last the dignity she had struggled to maintain for years. A ripple of whispers swept past her as she pushed through the ponderous double doors. Some were from courthouse habitués, their interest spurred by the sight of a woman they knew from television. Others were members of the Brown family's extensive circle, their faces a mixture of curiosity, suspicion, and something unreadable. Perhaps guilt, perhaps shame. Mary's heart raced as she scanned the room. She could feel the invisible weight of judgment pressing down, but she refused to let it shake her resolve. The courtroom was an ancient, stately building, its sweeping ceilings and richly paneled wood contributing to the solemnity of the occasion. Banks of benches reached up to the front, crowded with individuals who had attended for a range of reasons, some with a personal stake, some in voyeuristic fascination. At the fore, the judge's bench was raised, seemingly out of reach, a commanding presence of power and finality. Behind him, the large American flag hung solemnly flanking a carved seal that reminded everyone present that truth and justice were the cornerstones of this room. Mary's mind wandered briefly to her life over the past decade, a life that had seemed at times like a glittering fairy tale. The cameras, the celebrity, the public image of her as the quietly faithful wife, none of those things had prepared her for the loneliness she had suffered behind those locked doors. The hushed allegations, the subterfuge, the sense of being constantly overlooked and undervalued, all accumulated like pressure in a secret chamber of her heart. Today she would burst that chamber wide open, revealing the ugliness she had suffered. She breathed deeply, her chest expanding and falling slowly. Every breath brought back memories of her power, every exhalation an exorcism of the terror that had imprisoned her for so long. Today she was not only Meri Brown, the reality star. She was Meri Brown, a woman who survived, a woman who battled in silence, and who was finally prepared to tell her story. As she walked towards the front, she saw the known faces of Kody Brown's other wives waiting in the gallery, each of them having their faces tightly set, hands clasped neatly in their laps. Christine's eyes were acute, even calculating, and Robin's eyes flickered with concern. The tension between them was thick, an unseen network of unspoken words, allegiances and backstabs across the courtroom. It was a delicate dance of survival and loyalty, and Meri had been waiting for a long time on the outside, observing and waiting for the perfect moment to move in. Her lawyer, a composed and assured woman with a presence of quiet authority, looked her straight in the eye and nodded minutely. That small action centered Meri more than anything else could. They had practiced this, rehearsed every conceivable approach, every question, every defense effort to distort the account. But even with preparation, the courtroom was volatile, and Meri was aware that control here was always precarious. The judge entered the room, his robes flowing as he seated himself behind the bench. A silence descended over the crowd, broken only by the occasional rustle of papers or cough from the crowd. He scanned the room, his eyes keen and calculated, finally coming to rest on Meri. His voice, smooth yet commanding, called the room into order, the sound ringing through the high-ceilinged room like a ringing bell. "All rise," he stated, and Meri could feel the weight of the moment bearing down on her. The room rose to its feet, and in that moment, she was both tiny and huge simultaneously. Tiny due to the vastness of the system she was now entering, yet huge because she had struggled to be here, to be heard, to call for accountability. Be seated. The judge went on, and the room did so. Whispers faded, and the air grew heavy with expectation. This was no longer gossip columns or reality television intrigue. This was about truth, about justice, about a life carefully lived behind closed doors being stripped bare before an unbiased court. Mary's mind raced as she reviewed the facts in her memory, the years of emotional neglect, the subtle yet persistent manipulations, the isolation that had slowly eroded her sense of self. She thought about the countless nights spent questioning her worth, the moments of quiet despair when she wondered if anyone would ever truly see her. And now, after years of silence, she would speak. The courtroom clerk started calling the case, and as the words Meri Brown versus Kody Brown rang out in the room, all the faces turned in her direction. She felt a chill run down her back, a combination of fear and adrenaline. But she set her shoulders back, raised her chin and took her initial move forward, each step purposeful, the weight of every year she had kept silent. As she walked past Kody, sitting stoically with an inscrutable face, she sensed the unseen tension snap like a tightly drawn wire. Their gazes met fleetingly, a mutual understanding of years of turmoil and unspoken resentments. The air in the room seemed to hold its breath, anticipating the tempest that was about to break. Mary's gaze swept over the courtroom one last time before she took her seat beside her attorney. She noticed the jury, attentive and serious, their faces a mix of curiosity and professional detachment. Each juror represented a potential conduit of justice, and Meri knew the importance of presenting herself not just as a victim, but as a credible, resilient individual who deserved to be heard. The opening arguments commenced, and Meri could feel her heart racing. The defense attorney's measured, calm words stood in jarring relief to the bristling passion of her own attorney. Each word constructed the foundation of the war to be waged, the intricate web of truth versus impression, emotion versus reason, reality versus appearance. As the final opening statements reached their conclusion, Meri granted herself a moment of private introspection. She considered the path that had led her to this place, to a young woman embarking on a polygamous union with hope and idealism, to the woman now standing before a courtroom brimming with judgment and expectation. Each failure, each heartache, each spoken deceit had brought her to this time, and she would not fail. The judge waited, allowing the room to settle for a moment before she called forward the first witness. Meri felt a burst of clarity. The whispers, the glares, the unspoken judgments, she no longer lived in fear of them. Today, she had a voice, a stage, and the bravery to insist that she tell her story. As the first piece of testimony was presented, Meri nodded forward, prepared to meet whatever the next moment would bring. The courtroom that had once seemed so daunting and overwhelming had become a platform for truth. Each beat of the heart resonated with intention. Each look held purpose. And Meri Brown, serene yet firm, knew that this was only the beginning of a battle that would shake everything to its core, for her, her family, and for the world that had so long gotten it wrong. In that charged, buzzing courtroom, one truth was obvious. The days of silence were behind her, and Meri Brown was now ready to face the past, no matter how painful, no matter how public, no matter what it would cost. The courtroom remained thick with tension. As the initial evidence came in, Meri sat straight, her fingers lightly set on her lap, fingers doodling patterns on the soft leather of her bag. The whispers had died down, taken over by a silence so dense it was almost choking, as though the room as a whole caught its breath, before what was to come. Her lawyer, a woman with an unflinching stare and quick mind, stood up from her seat, demanding attention solely through presence. She started to construct the basis of the case, her tone firm but laced with subtle intensity. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she started, this case is not about television gossip or the circus of television. It's a matter of truth, of years of emotional abuse, manipulation and lying that have left irreparable damage on the life of Meri Brown. What we're presenting here today is not an entertainment story. It is a story about justice. Mary's heart thudded in her chest as she watched the defense attorney's face remain stoic, carefully calculating. She knew that behind that calm exterior lay an arsenal of strategies designed to protect Kody Brown and the carefully curated image he had maintained for decades. But she also knew that the truth, when presented clearly and undeniably, had a way of piercing even the most elaborate facades. The first of these was presented, a pile of text messages and emails, some going back years, all carefully arranged by her lawyers. They were flashed onto a large screen for the court to view. Every message created a picture of a pattern of behavior, delicate, mostly imperceptible to the outside world, yet crippling in its emotional damage. There were messages minimizing Mary's feelings, dismissing her concerns, and subtly undermining her confidence. The jury leaned forward, captivated by the clarity and consistency of the evidence. Mary's gaze never wavered from the screen. She remembered each moment vividly. The nights spent questioning her self-worth, the attempts to speak up and be heard, and the frustration of being silenced or gaslighted. Seeing the messages now, laid out in black and white, was both painful and empowering. It was proof that she had not imagined the manipulation, that her feelings were valid, and that her experiences deserved recognition. Her attorney began to narrate the timeline, connecting each piece of evidence to specific events in Mary's life. Here, she said, pointing to a highlighted email, we see the pattern clearly. Over a period of months, Kody systematically dismissed Mary's attempts to assert her emotional needs, replacing empathy with indifference or subtle ridicule. This is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern of neglect that has profound psychological and emotional consequences. The jury listened intently, the significance of the evidence weighing on them. Even the judge, whose face had remained impassive, raised an eyebrow in surprise, indicating the seriousness of what was being heard. Meri could feel a surge of silent victory. For the first time in years, the truth was no longer solely her burden to bear. It was being acknowledged, examined, and proved in an official forum. But the revelations did not stop there. The next set of evidence included financial documents, showing decisions that directly impacted Mary's autonomy and stability. Funds were allocated disproportionately among the wives, leaving Meri at a disadvantage in maintaining her independence. The courtroom murmured again, the implications of such control becoming more apparent with each passing moment. The subtle ways in which she had been marginalized were now unmistakable, undeniable, and public. Mary's attorney paused, allowing the jury to absorb the significance. Then, with a swift motion, she introduced a series of audio recordings, conversations in which Kody's tone shifted from dismissive to manipulative, often in response to Mary's attempts to express concern or seek emotional connection. Each clip was a dagger, puncturing the carefully maintained image of harmony and devotion that the Brown family had presented to the world. As the recordings played, Mary's hands clenched in her lap, not from fear, but from the intensity of reliving her experiences. She remembered the feelings behind each word, the frustration, the longing, the quiet desperation to be seen and heard. Now those moments were being acknowledged by others, validated by the very institution that represented justice and fairness. The other wives shifted in their seats. Christine's lips compressed into a thin line, revealing a flash of discomfort, while Robin's hands shook minutely, revealing a blend of sympathy and confusion. The air between them was charged with almost tangible tension, an unspoken recognition that the long-held dynamics were suddenly being challenged in a very public forum. Meri experienced a curious combination of sadness and vindication. Sadness over the years wasted on being ignored and manipulated. Vindication for having had the strength to expose these realities. The defense got up to counter, their tone measured, trying to downplay the effect of the evidence. Your Honor, the attorney started. These messages and recordings are being taken out of context. The timeline shown here is selective, and the picture being painted is not the overall scenario of family dynamics. Mary's lawyer responded quickly. Context is important, Your Honor, but trends can't be dismissed. What we have is not selective. It's consistent and verified in multiple sources. The emotional damage to Meri Brown is real, quantifiable, and irrefutable. The courtroom was quiet once more. The gravity of the words suspended heavily in the air. All attention was on Meri as her lawyer spelled out the emotional burden, linking the evidence to psychological tests and expert opinion which set out the long-term consequences of prolonged emotional neglect. The jurors' faces changed subtly, their interest intensifying, as the gravity of the situation became apparent. Then came the moment that shook the room. A new piece of evidence, a private journal, carefully preserved and authenticated, was presented. Pages upon pages of Meri's innermost thoughts, her fears, her frustrations, and her moments of quiet hope were laid bare. The entries spoke of betrayal, isolation, and the struggle to maintain a sense of self amid constant emotional turmoil. The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, the raw honesty of the words demanding attention. Meri's voice shook as she testified in court about an excerpt from her journal, reading aloud a section that had troubled her for years. "I feel invisible, like my needs don't matter. I try to speak, but no one listens. I am a shadow in my own life." The hush that followed was deep, interrupted only by the gentle sniffles of a few members in the audience. Even the judge appeared to be temporarily touched, his pen hesitating mid-note as he took in the severity of her anguish. Her lawyer linked the diary entries with the overall storyline of manipulation and abuse. "These letters are not private ruminations," she declared firmly. "They are proof of the emotional life Meri Brown has lived, a life which cannot be dismissed or ignored. They affirm, beyond question, the effect of the defendant's actions on her mental and emotional health." As the day went on, the courtroom was a stage for a complex and agonizing dance of reality and perception. Each witness who was called, each document submitted, each audio tape played, all helped build a vivid mosaic of neglect and manipulation that Kody Brown had sought to cover up for so long. Meri sat, at times with tears threatening to overflow in her eyes, at times with fists clenched in determination, as the story of her life was spelled out for all to know. The other wives, who were once comrades in a common history, now looked uncertain about their roles. The evidence not just contradicted Kody's actions but the roles everyone had played, consciously or otherwise, in the perpetuation of the system that had hurt them. It was a complicated emotional knot being unknotted, and Meri was at the epicenter, empowered and weighted by the burden of the truth. By the end of the day, the jury had been presented with a compelling, undeniable portrait of emotional neglect. Meri's courage in exposing her vulnerability, combined with the meticulous presentation of evidence, had created a narrative impossible to ignore. The courtroom, once a space of intimidation, had transformed into a space of revelation, where hidden truths were finally coming to light. As the meeting ended for the day, Meri stood up, tired and energized. She had entered into the storm, and refused to back down. More confrontation and emotional battles lay ahead on the road, but for the first time in decades, she felt the strength of being seen, heard and understood. The war was not over yet, but the groundwork was laid. The secrets previously concealed were now out, and Meri Brown had secured herself at the center of truth. The courtroom became a whispered hush when Meri Brown took the stand. All eyes in the room, jury, judge, audience, and even the Brown family were on her. She had been the quiet, unassuming wife for years, lost or forgotten in the sprawling family soap opera that had played out on TV. Today, the silent woman would have a voice, and what she said carried with it decades of unspoken hurt and tolerance. She stood up slowly, her stance purposeful, her movements slow. Every step sounded heightened in the courtroom, echoing off of the high ceilings like a beat of determination. The judge's gaze came to hers for an instant, and within that glance, she sensed both the attention and the fairness of the law. She took a deep breath, and walked to the stand and sat down in the witness chair, her hands clasped primly in front of her. Her lawyer leaned in, providing a reassuring nod. It was an unspoken reminder. She was not alone. This was her time, not for photographers, not for rumors, but for truth. The court reporter clicked her pen into place, capturing every word, making certain that nothing Meri spoke would be lost or overlooked. The defense lawyer, unhurried and collected, started the examination with a gentle, near-measured tone. "Miss Brown, Would you please describe your experiences in your marriage to Mr. Brown? Mary's own throat constricted, but she compelled herself to articulate plainly. For years she started. I attempted to be noticed, to be heard, to be appreciated. But repeatedly, my emotions were invalidated, my fears downplayed, and my emotional needs disregarded. I existed in a reality where my voice was invisible. The words themselves were tranquil, but underlying them was an undertone of raw emotion that caused some in the courtroom to look around at one another. Even the judge inched forward in his seat, engaged. The jury, composed of men and women of diverse backgrounds, listened carefully. They had heard some evidence already of neglect and control, but to hear it from Meri firsthand put a face on things that no report or tape could ever achieve. Her account became more descriptive when she described particular incidents. I recall one night, she replied, her voice firm but shaking, when I attempted to convey how alone I felt. I was treated with indifference. No recognition, no compassion, only silence. It was there, in those silences, that I understood how intensely alone I had become, even with my own family. She stopped, swallowing hard against a knot in her throat, and looked at Kody for a fleeting moment. His face continued to be unreadable, but she saw the flash of discomfort in his eyes. This was not an act for deep shelf Kody. This was a witness statement of her actual life. Her lawyer then permitted her to read some of the excerpts from her journal, carefully chosen to describe the emotional pain she had suffered. One of them said, "I am a shadow in my own life. I fake a smile for the cameras, but inside I am shattering. I yearn for someone to see me, to recognize me, to care." The courtroom was silent. Some audience members shifted uncomfortably, unable to hide their empathy. Others stared in disbelief, astonished that such raw, intimate emotions could have been overlooked for so long. Mary's voice, though trembling at times, grew steadier with each word. She realized that her vulnerability was not weakness. It was strength. It was proof of endurance, resilience, and courage. The defense attorney attempted to interject, asking leading questions designed to minimize her experiences. "Miss Brown, isn't it true that you've had moments of happiness in your marriage as well?" Mary's eyes did not shift. "Yes," she admitted quietly. "There were moments of happiness. But happiness does not erase years of neglect. Happiness does not undo the isolation I felt, the constant struggle to be heard, the emotional manipulation that eroded my sense of self." Her answer quieted the room. The division she drew between fleeting happiness and prolonged emotional abandonment was unmistakable and persuasive. The jury shifted forward, taking in the subtlety and richness of what she said. As testimony went on, Meri spoke of moments where the emotional neglect was a part of daily life, her opinions ignored in family choices, her emotions dismissed in times that counted, and her attempts at connection met with icy indifference. Every anecdote was richly detailed, sharply memoried, and intensely personal, depicting a life bound not by statute, but by manipulation and erasure. Her lawyer then walked her through the effect of this neglect on her state of mind. "Miss Brown, how has this impacted you all these years?" Meri hesitated, collecting her thoughts. "It has been draining," she confessed. "There were times when I wondered about my own value. Nights I cried myself to sleep, wondering if I had any right to be treated with respect, with love, with regard." The psychological impact is deep. It permeates all areas of your life when your emotions are repeatedly denied and belittled. The jury scribbled notes, clearly moved. The room, once tense with anticipation, now vibrated with the raw intensity of Mary's honesty. For those who had only seen her on television, this testimony shattered the carefully curated image of a quiet, compliant wife. They were witnessing a woman reclaiming her voice, her agency, and her dignity. Mary's attorney then asked her to address the broader implications of the manipulation she endured, not just on herself, but on the family dynamic as a whole. "How did these experiences affect your relationships within the family?" Mary's eyes softened a little as she thought. "It made us space out. It made it tense. I walked around on eggshells all the time, doing everything I could to prevent fights, to keep the peace, while I struggled to get my needs met. It wasn't just me that suffered, It influenced the way I related to the children, to the other wives, to everyone in the home. It's lonely, and it leaves scars that aren't easily erased. The courtroom took the force of her words. The subtle, intangible means in which emotional neglect creeps into relationships were made tangible through her witness. Even the judge, who'd heard thousands of cases, nodded ever so slightly, aware of the richness of what was being said. Then there came the moment that really brought the courtroom to its feet. Meri had spoken of betrayal, not a betrayal of deeds, but of trust, of promises, of emotional ties that were to be inviolate. I trusted that my feelings counted, she said, her voice firm now with quiet resolve. I trusted that honesty and concern would direct our relationship. But again and again, those trusts were violated. And each broken trust left me lonelier, more uncertain of who I was, and more needy for recognition. One tear escaped down her cheek, and she didn't brush it away. It was a tangible witness to the pain that had been hers for so many years, without her saying a word. The jurors' combined attention heightened. It was no longer a tale. They were seeing the price of humanity, of manipulation and neglect. The defense tried to deflect, challenging her credibility and implying that her perceptions were distorted. But Meri's lawyer was ready, leading her to reiterate her testimony with clarity and poise. "Brown," she inquired, "are you quite sure that what you've told me is your accurate experience?" Meri's voice boomed out, unflinching. "Yes, this is my truth. It has been hard, lonely, and painful, but it is the truth, and I am here to make it be heard." As she finished testifying for the day, the air was heavy with emotion. Some members of the audience were visibly shaken, others were stony, their faces absorbing the intensity of what she was saying. Even Kody, who was normally stoic, showed a flash of discomfort, the mask of detachment breaking for an instant. Meri stood up from the stand, the fatigue of reliving her ordeal, but also the thrill of having spoken the truth. For so many years, she had kept quiet. Today she had regained her voice. The courtroom that had been a place of fear was now a platform of her bravery. She had endured the probing of law, the judgment of society, and the intricate dynamics of her family, and she had held ground. As she sat back down next to her lawyer, Meri gave herself a subtle personal feeling of victory. It wasn't the end of the fight, but it was the turning point. She had converted pain into testimony, silence into speech, and invisibility into inescapable presence. The day ended with the courtroom buzzing quietly, the jurors and audience members carrying with them the gravity of Meri's words. She had bared her soul, exposed the emotional landscape of her life, and planted the seeds for justice to take root. And for Meri Brown, the path forward, though still fraught with challenge, was now illuminated by the power of truth, resilience, and unwavering courage. The courtroom had come to a rhythm in the previous days. Evidence read out, testimonies given, emotions stripped bare. The jury watched intently every movement, the judge carefully writing down every gesture, and the audience had turned into a silent witness to a tale of emotional manipulation and neglect. But nobody was ready for what was to come next. The defense lawyer rose, smooth and measured, a slight smile on his face. "Your Honor," he started off, his tone even but with an underlying edge that sent the room tightening. "We have recently discovered new evidence that would change the perception of this case by quite some margin." A collective murmur ran through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged glances. The audience stiffened, and even Meri's attorney leaned forward, alert but wary. The air crackled with anticipation. "What is this evidence?" the judge asked, his voice firm but intrigued. The defense lawyer waved aloft a pile of envelopes, bringing out letters meticulously stamped and dated. "These letters," he said, "were signed by Miss Brown herself, in which she entertains reservations about the accusations she has made in court, and expresses doubts as to the validity of her own grievances." The courtroom was charged with anticipation as the last day of hearings commenced. The jurors, having listened for days, pored over evidence and considered the factual and emotional complexities of the case, now faced the daunting task of rendering a verdict. Meri Brown sat quietly in her chair, her hands folded, her mind a maelstrom of expectancy, consideration, and guarded optimism. The prosecution and the defense had made their final arguments the day before, and now it was left for the jurors to deliberate. The air in the room was heavy with anticipation. Journalists, photographers, and curious bystanders packed into the gallery, cameras and notebooks scanning every subtle face, every muted sigh, every twitch of feeling. For Meri, the world outside was secondary. What was important was the culmination of years of quietness, effort, and unspoken pain, finally being heard within a court of law. Her attorney leaned over briefly, whispering words of encouragement. "You've done this. You've spoken the truth. Now let the jury decide." Meri nodded, absorbing the reassurance but remaining grounded in the gravity of the moment. Every fiber of her being was aware that this was more than a legal battle. It was a personal reckoning, a test of integrity, courage, and resilience. The judge walked in, his authoritative presence drawing everyone's attention instantly. He brought the room to order, his voice deep and reverberating against the vaulted ceilings. "Members of the jury," he asked, "have you come to a verdict in the case of Meri Brown versus Kody Brown?" The foreperson, a calm woman with a steady eye, stood and extended the verdict slip to the bailiff. The room was still, the weight of collective expectation almost palpable. The bailiff walked up to the bench, and the judge slowly unsealed the paper. "On the issues of emotional neglect, manipulation, and the truth of testimony," the judge said, speaking deliberately, "the jury finds in favor of the plaintiff, Meri Brown." A gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a stunned silence. Mary's chest tightened, as if the words themselves carried the weight of years of pent-up emotions. Relief, vindication, and disbelief collided inside her, leaving her momentarily speechless. She blinked rapidly, tears threatening to spill, but held them back with the same measured control that had carried her through the trial. Her lawyer gave her shoulder a firm squeeze, a silent tribute to triumph. Meri drew a deep, stabilizing breath, permitting herself to absorb the importance of the moment. This was not a mere victory in court. It was an acknowledgement, a validation, acknowledgement of life as she had known it. The hurt she had suffered, the strength she had mustered, and the endurance she had developed. The court audience burst into muted applause. Some people softly cheering, others dabbing at tears. Supporters and friends of Meri stood up, showing their admiration and respect. Even the jurors, who had spent the previous days deep in careful deliberation, smiled quietly, silently agreeing that justice had been done. Meri's gaze swept across the room, settling momentarily on Kody Brown. His expression was unreadable, a mask of neutrality betraying nothing, yet Meri sensed the flicker of understanding in his eyes. The dynamics of the family, long maintained with careful calculation, had shifted irrevocably. For the first time, the power balance had tilted, not toward image, control, or manipulation, but toward truth, dignity, and recognition. Her attorney guided her toward the stand for closing remarks, giving her the opportunity to address the court, the audience, and the world. Meri's voice, steady and clear, carried through the room. "This ruling is not a victory for me personally," she started, her eyes shining but firm. "It is a statement of the strength of truth, of the value of speaking out, and of the strength of those who have been silenced for too long. I stand here not only for myself, but on behalf of all those who have ever felt invisible, inaudible, or dismissed. Today, truth has won out." Her words struck deep, ringing through the vaulted room. The courtroom, once a place of fear and condemnation, had become a refuge of recognition and empowerment. All who were there sensed the weight of her victory, not a mere judicial one, but a reclaiming of voice, dignity, and self-esteem. The judge provided a short but significant acknowledgement. "Miss Brown, courage and honesty have marked your journey through this ordeal. The court acknowledges the value of your testimony and the integrity of your complaint. This case serves as testament that the truth, if borne with integrity, cannot be silenced." As the gavel fell, marking the formal end of the trial, an emotion washed over Meri. She felt the burden of years removed from her shoulders, the culmination of hidden struggle and unspoken pain, at last recognized in a public, formal, and irrefutable manner. She was free, not only from the emotional manipulation to which she had been subjected, but from the dark shadow of invisibility that had pursued her life. Outside the courtroom, there was a burst of camera flashes and reporters begging for quotes. But Meri walked with quiet dignity, providing a few well-thought-out words. This is a day for truth, a day for recognition, and a day for anyone who has ever been silenced to know that their voice matters. Her lawyer, who had stood by her side so constantly, grinned. You did it, Meri. You survived decades of suffering, lies, and doubt. And you came out stronger, louder, and unbroken. Meri's thoughts drifted briefly to the journey that had brought her here. The isolation, the heartbreak, the whispered doubts, and the subtle manipulations she had endured for so long. All of it had led to this moment of clarity, vindication, and empowerment. The courtroom had been a battlefield, but it had also been a stage for her resilience, courage, and unwavering commitment to truth. The Brown family dynamics, once so carefully choreographed and preserved under the spotlight of public attention, would never again be the same. Kody, the other wives, and even members of the extended family would be forced to face the harsh realities of manipulation, neglect, and the unarguable power of a woman who wasn't about to stay quiet. Meri recognized that healing was only just starting. The court had sanctioned her experiences, but the path to emotional healing, self-empowerment, and family reunification, or separation would go on. But for the first time in years, she felt deep within a sense of empowerment. She had regained her voice, her narrative, and her truth, and no one could ever take it away from her. When the sun went down, and the courtroom grew quiet, Meri walked outside into the light. Everything seemed bigger, brighter, and more appealing. There were cameras that flashed, but no longer were they intrusive to her. They were witnesses to her bravery, her strength, and her victory. She smiled really truly for the first time, not for the public, not for the cameras, but for herself. For Meri Brown, the verdict was not just justice, it was redemption. It was the validation that truth is important, that bravery is important, and that no amount of manipulating, lying, or skepticism can shatter the integrity of a woman who won't be silenced. She breathed deeply, the sun's warmth on her face, and gave herself a moment to be still. Each tear, each restless night, each doubt about herself had brought her here. She had survived, she had battled, and she had triumphed. Not only a trial by jury, but the victory over decades of invisibility and silencing. And as she stepped away from the courthouse, the world watching, Meri Brown stood with renewed purpose, a new sense of dignity, and an unbreakable strength. This was her tale, her truth, and her redemption, and nothing would ever take it from her. A stunned silence settled over the room. The eyebrows of the judge flew up. The entire jury looked at Meri. Even Kody's other wives leaned in, a mix of curiosity, anticipation, and quiet satisfaction flashing across their faces. Meri felt a chill run through her veins. Her heart raced, questioning letters about her own experiences. How was this possible? She knew, deep in her heart, the letters did not reveal anything that was hers. They were faked, made to raise doubts, to invalidate her statement. But the jolt of reading them being read out in court, before all, was unmistakable. Her lawyer stood up instantly, eyes narrowing in controlled anger. "Your Honor," she stated, "these are forged documents. Miss Brown did not pen these letters. We have forensic handwriting analysis, proof that they are forgeries. This is a method of manipulation by the defense to sway perception and defy the truth." The defense lawyer, unfazed, replied in a smooth manner, "We believe in the genuineness of these letters, and ask that the court allow them to be used as evidence." The room contracted in severity, the tension so heavy it became choking. The jurors crouched forward, the burden of opposite accounts weighing upon them. For Meri, this was not simply a fight in the court, it was personal. It was an attack on her integrity, her bravery, and the painstaking evidence she had provided during the previous sessions. "Your Honor," her attorney continued, "we request that these letters be subjected to immediate expert verification before they are presented as valid evidence. Miss Brown's credibility cannot be manipulated by fabricated documents." The judge, recognizing the gravity and urgency of the moment, nodded. "We will have these letters examined by certified experts immediately. Until verification, they will not be considered as evidence." Despite this respite, tension persisted. The defense's gamble at manipulation had shaken the court, and murmurs spread among the spectators. It was obvious that the case was no longer merely one of emotional neglect. It had become a struggle for truth, perception, and the integrity of the court procedure. After the letters were reserved for authentication, Meri resumed the witness stand to continue testifying, this time with a more robust voice. She explained the emotional blackmail that she had experienced and how she had been isolated, pointing out that efforts to discredit her using forged documents would not scare her off from exposing the truth. "These are the very reasons why I'm here," Meri declared with conviction, sweeping her eyes across the room, flicking briefly to Kody. "Not only to tell my story, but so that truth cannot be distorted, cannot be manipulated, and cannot be silenced. Deception and lies will not win." Her words reached the hearts of the jury, the audience, and even some of Brown family members. There was a certain unspoken bravery in how she broke down the lies, and it was proof of the depth of her integrity. The defense, realizing the situation was turning against them, tried to switch tack. They added a string of statements from acquaintances and relatives who testified that they had personally seen flashes of apparent conflict between Meri and her lawyer, and tried to imply collusion or overstatement in her allegations. Meri, composed but firm, refuted each argument in turn. "The individuals who make these accusations are either misinformed or motivated by efforts to defend another person's reputation. My experiences are genuine. My testimony is genuine. And no matter how much they try to manipulate, it won't negate that reality." The courtroom drama was at its peak when the forensic report of the controversial letters was received. The expert witness, a dour-looking woman with an aura of authority, read out the findings. After careful examination, the expert explained, "The letters in question are not written in Miss Brown's handwriting or established patterns of communication. They are fakes, designed to deceive the court, most probably." The courtroom was filled with soft gasps and mutterings. The judge was clearly shaken by the news. "So to make sure," he said, "these letters aren't real and are worthless as evidence in this case?" "That's right, Your Honor," the expert affirmed. Meri experienced a rush of relief and vindication. Years of silence, years of the insidious manipulation and gaslighting, had been followed by a concrete victory. The effort to disqualify her had fallen short, and the truth had been confirmed once more. Even Kody's other wives were unable to conceal their reactions. Christine's calm momentary slip, and Robin's eyes opening in realization of the shrewd attempt to destabilize Meri, betrayed the carefully constructed facade of family dynamics. What was kept hidden in the public eye now stood revealed as flimsy and vulnerable before the light of truth. Meri's attorney seized the opportunity to reinforce the narrative. "Your Honor, this is precisely why Miss Brown's testimony and documented experiences are crucial. Not only has she endured years of emotional neglect, but she has also faced attempts to distort reality and discredit her claims. The integrity of this case depends on acknowledging the truth, despite manipulative tactics." The judge nodded, acknowledging the significance of the moment. "It is clear that there have been attempts to undermine the proceedings. The court will ensure that all evidence presented is authentic and relevant. Miss Brown, your testimony remains central to this case." Meri breathed deeply, the triumph and fatigue weighing upon her at the same time. She had weathered the most subtle strategy the defense had to offer, a distortion of reality itself, and had come out whole. Throughout the day, more evidence supported her allegations, every detail carefully linked to her individual experiences, her emotional process, and the recorded patterns of neglect. The surprise, at first a shockwave meant to shake her, eventually proved the strength of her resilience and will. By the end of the session, it was clear to all present in the courtroom that Meri Brown was no victim of circumstance or manipulation. She was an intelligent, courageous woman with unshakable integrity. The bid to discredit her had so spectacularly backfired, highlighting the truth she had so diligently struggled to lay bare. As she stepped off the stand, the courtroom appeared to vibrate with the power of awakening. Whispers swirled, jurors looked at one another with respect, and the Brown family members were left to deal with the realization that their meticulously built facade had been rocked to its foundation. Meri walked with measured steps, her eyes unwavering, her determination unshaken. The turn had been sensational, stunning, and chilling, but only made her stronger. The future remained unclear, But for the first time, truth had come out as an irresistible force, and she had established her strength, her resilience, and her adamant devotion to justice.